She's a fluent speaker of the Sylheti language, and she's passionate about multilingualism. And as a member of the UK Parliament, she's focused on the importance of regulating the interpreting and translation profession in the UK. A very warm welcome to Apsana Begum MP. Welcome, Apsana.
Thank you so much, Samina, and thank you so much to the Linguists Collective for inviting me, and in particular Mamoon as well, who I've known for a number of years and has been doing really good work in this area for some time, across Luton, but also Bedfordshire and in London as well. It's lovely to meet all of you today. I mean, as an MP, we get invited to lots of events, lots of conferences, but I made it a priority to come to your forum here today on this important day, because I think it's really important the work you do, and also joining up and bringing people together globally as well, in one on one platform, but also on this important area which I'm incredibly passionate about, as Samina has said. What I want to do in the time that I've got is perhaps to talk a little bit about obviously the background of International Mother Languages Day. I'm not going to preach too much to the converted around recognising the importance of the work that we're all doing in this area, but there are a few things I wanted to touch upon on that, and then I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about what I think perhaps needs to happen in terms of local, national and international level investment in this area. There is so much I could probably say in terms of the global context, in terms of in which we operate, and depending on how much time we've got after that, I may be able to also take a few questions. So I think the date is on the 21st of February, or Ekushi February in Bangla, because it marks well, this year it marks 71 years since the time when political activists and students in Dhaka were killed whilst demanding official status for their mother language, which was Bangla. And I think it's important, in one sense, obviously, we recognise this day as UN International Mother Languages Day, but also to recognise it as Language Martyrs Day as well, which is what is a national holiday in Bangladesh. And people go and pay respects at the Martyrs Memorial in Bangladesh to honour the Bengali students that died. And I think it's important to recognise the unique part of world history, because there are, I think perhaps no other example of a language movement which resulted in deaths, resulted in killing, which was centered around the rights to having mother tongue, having language, and not having language repressed. So it's a really unique part, in my view, of world history to look at the Bengali language movement itself. And I think for me it has a lot of personal meaning as a British Bangladeshi, growing up and representing an area with a large Bengali speaking population as well. So the roots, I guess, of UN International Mother Languages Day is related to the 21st of February 1952, when Bengali students were martyred, fighting and protesting and demanding that the Urdu language not be imposed on them as the only official language in what was then East Pakistan. And in 1999, of course, Bangladesh, which became independent in 1971 and became the country Bangladesh, put forward a motion at the United Nations to have this day recognised. And since 1999, the 21st of February is, of course, commemorated in this way. And I think this has so much significance, I think, in the UK, just as anywhere else, because I think if I look at my constituency and the borough that I come from, East London, for example, has one of the most linguistically vibrant areas in the entire country, and it's been identified that there are at least 90 languages, different languages being used in Tower Hamlets in my borough alone. So as the MP, I guess, for a diverse and dynamic constituency, I'd say, every day highlights the benefits of celebrating our various cultural heritages, our linguistic diversity, learning from different traditions of living together, interacting with one another, and just nurturing that importance of the language and culture that grows out of those experiences. And it was for that reason as well, when I sort of got elected, I started looking at the parliamentary space and looking at whether this area had been debated, had been whether this day had been marked or commemorated in any way, and I discovered that it hadn't been. So last year I led a debate in Westminster Hall in Parliament to mark International Mother Languages Day, which was the first time it'd been done since 1999, and also to pay tribute to the sacrifices of those who'd been killed in 1952, but also to bring colleagues together to recognise the importance of the work that we've got to do at a national level as well, to preserve the languages that we have in the UK and the linguistic diversity that we have in all of our different areas, whether that's those of us that work in interpreting, whether that's those of us who are teachers, whether those of us that are, sort of learning and wanting to sort of seek knowledge through different languages as well through our education system. And I think, it cuts across so much. And what I wanted to sort of touch upon now is really that, no one here, I think, can deny that language is one of the most important parts of any culture and any society. And of course, the language that we use, the words that we use are constantly evolving and changing in the world that we live in. And, I think that language diversity is at the heart of human brilliance. There's no doubt about it. I think that we are richer for the range of people who call Britain home, but may carry in their hearts the language of another land. So I think once we recognise, Language Martyrs Day, International Mother Languages Day, it's important for us, I think, to emphasise the significance of protecting, nurturing and embracing different cultures, languages and ways of life. And I really think that accepting ourselves is accepting each other as well. And Samina, you mentioned, I think, multiculturalism and multilingualism. Multiculturalism is a privilege, it's not a problem. And language diversity makes the collective fabric of our society stronger. And the current landscape in our country, I know, for me, I recognise that we're seeing a growing trend whereby there are attempts to engage in so-called culture wars. There are attempts with anti-immigration rhetoric, being used as a smokescreen to hide society's wider failings, and that's fueling fear, that's fueling racist attitudes. And so I think, in whatever sector we're in whatever field we're in, we've got to make sure we push all the benefits of linguistic diversity, because what we don't want to see happen is language being used as a tool to construct some people as being the other, and forcing them to assimilate as well. And again, to go back to what I was saying before, all around the world, states have often restricted official use of minority languages due to the idea that it might be necessary to only use specified languages. And you can see that in even countries like China, where we can see the Tibetan communities are being stopped from using their language, and in other countries as well. And I think we've come out of the pandemic, we're sort of still sort of recovering and coming out of that. And I think we saw in the pandemic that many minority language speakers continue to be excluded from learning and accessing crucial information. That had an impact in various different ways, but in particular I'd say in terms of the way in which ethnic minority communities were able to sort of access information that was extremely vital and important, but also the way in which the narratives around ethnic minority communities developed throughout the pandemic as well, with the use of quite divisive language in some instances. So again, really, really crucial that we keep up the work that we do. What I want to come on to now is something that I recognised was happening at a local level, but I know is something that has also happened in other areas in the UK. I think it's really important that key local and public provisions of community language services remain free at the point of use, and that digital technology is made widely available for multilingual learning. In Tower Hamlets, we had a community language service that was developed, I guess, really at the tail end of the anti-fascist and anti-racist movement in the 1970s. Those of you that will be aware about, be aware of what happened in Brick Lane, in Tower Hamlets at the time, and the pressure that was on the local council, the local infrastructure, to make sure that there was an ability for services to reflect and to be designed in a way that could support local people. And from that point on, some services developed, including the community languages services, that was able to provide language classes in Bangla and other languages, and that carried forward for a number of decades. And research, has shown that in the education system, where there are options available for people to explore their mother language, that they experience generally a higher attainment level than those that don't. And I think that the evidence has been there for decades in this area, and I think it's really important, therefore, that local community services are protected, that they're not outsourced and they're not cut as well. Sadly, we've seen that type of service being another casualty in the programme of public sector cuts, which has been disastrous. But at the same time, I'm aware, and I'm glad to have seen initiatives such as that in Manchester. I've seen at the local council there, at some of the local councils there, initiatives that have tried to invest in this area, because again, what that will do is keep the fabric of society together and counteract attempts to sow division and hate. And I remember in Tower Hamlets a few years back, when we were faced with those cuts to our services, it did bring the community together to reaffirm and recognise again the value of such services. I myself benefited from the services, and I know the benefits that brings in terms of being able to read and speak in my mother language. But just to move on a bit more in terms of the national and international level, of course, I've mentioned the COVID crisis, I've mentioned sort of the barriers and challenges in regards to sort of accessing services. But the theme of this year's International Mother Languages Day at the UN is multilingual education, a necessity to transform education. And it's been observed globally that 40% of the population does not actually have access to an education in a language that they speak or understand. And the UN, the United Nations, has noted that every 2 weeks, a language disappears, taking with it an entire cultural and intellectual heritage. And I think that's a really, really sad fact, that that's sort of the direction that things are heading in. And I think that, that can change. And I think it's imperative on all of us to try and preserve and to try and do work in this area to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's why I think days like this are incredibly important. I think that there's been work that's been done at the United Nations level in particular that have really focused around the need to invest in education, in the education systems in this area, and really looking at first language or mother tongue being something that needs to be invested in from the early years of every child's life. Because that can improve the inclusion in the education system later on in life for somebody of a young age. So I think that's a really key part, I think, of going forward in particular, to look at this particular theme and how that develops. And I think about it in the UK context as well, because again, a few years back, only a year or two years ago, we were talking about whether schools and school children had access to laptops, had access, and whether schools and the school infrastructure in our country had enough technology-based solutions to maintain the continuity of learning in the UK. And we are in the UK, but it was still very apparent by the time we got into the first wave of the pandemic that too many lacked the necessary equipment, and as such, many campaigns developed for that reason as well. And we know that in today's world, fast and reliable broadband is not a desirable extra. It's fundamental. and it's almost certainly, vital for education and linguistic development as well. I'm proud to have been part of a manifesto in the last general election that pledged to offer free and fast broadband, because again, that would make sure that every household in this country is able to take part in the education system most fully as well.
Apsana, I'm very mindful. So just to bring everybody into the conversation, Apsana, as I mentioned earlier, is a member of Parliament here in the UK. She has some parliamentary duties to attend at 4 o'clock. So I'm very mindful of that. We have a couple of questions for you, if I may. We've got, I believe, Abu Tariq. So if we could unmute Abu Tariq, and Abu, if you could concisely put your question to Apsana, we'd be very grateful.
Yeah, thank you very much. My first question is, sorry, for some obvious reason, I can't, start my video. So my first question is, can't we say Bengali, Bangla instead of Bengali? Because whatever we say, it's our word. So whatever we say, that should be practiced by everyone. The second question is that, as the technology has developed, so can't we go for speaking in our own language, especially for higher studies, and the technology itself will translate it into the intended language so that these higher studies can be eased for everyone and have an easy access to everyone? Because, there's IELTS, TOEFL, and many other things required for higher studies. But this is a kind of barrier. But if the help of technology can be taken, so it will be easier. So keeping in mind the concept of multilingualism.
Yeah, and, Abu, forgive my interruption. I think you've made your point clearly. So Apsana, if you would like to respond to that, and then I have another question for you.
Yeah, very quickly in the first one, I completely agree with you. Bengali, Bangla, I think often I find myself as a second, third generation British Bangladeshi using those words interchangeably. I think we all do to some degree. I often find myself, speaking, English and Bangla with a mix when I'm speaking to family members and my nieces and nephews of a younger generation. So I think those things are incredibly positive. And yes, we shouldn't shy away from using our language and also inviting others to be able to maybe, explore and use parts of our language as well. And in terms of technology, look, I agree with you. I think there is also, we shouldn't be complacent in the area of technology. And very quickly, I was going to just use the example of Google Translate. It's a fantastic tool. You can literally say something in English or in your spoken language and then translate it and maybe press play on it, and then somebody you're speaking to in another country could understand what you're saying. But what that the only concerns I have around that is that it's great that we have these kind of tools in universities, in other places that can definitely help with that. But I do worry that there's an entire there are entire groups of people that would not have access to that because of the internet accessibility, particularly in the global south, but also disabled people as well. And I think whilst we are making great strides in this area, we've got to make sure we take everyone with us.
Thank you. And I believe we've got Mace Huck from the Sylheti Mace Bai organization. If we could unmute Mace, if he's joined us today.
Hi, Samina.
Hi, Mace, just we're quite tight on time, so if you could just very eloquent, I know you're going to put it very eloquently, put your question to Apsana.
Yes, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to keep it very short. It's just that before we make any changes, like I said, I respect all sort of cultures and sort of languages, but in order for effective changes to be made, we need to obviously listen to the people from the ground. And what I mean by that is that Bengali, it's fantastic, yeah, it is what it is, but however, I'm a Sylheti. I do not speak Bengali. Sylheti is a different language on its own right. It's not a dialect of Bengali. As a member of parliament, what is Apsana proposing to do to recognize this, that obviously the majority of diaspora in the UK are Sylheti speakers. If you get a Sylheti speaker and a Bengali speaker in the same room, they will not understand each other's language unless they've had education in each other's language also. So therefore, Sylheti needs to be recognized and what is happening about that. Thank you.
So, Apsana?
Thank you. Well, I think the main thing that I would say is this: if there's one lesson to take away from the language movement, and one lesson to take away from International Mother Languages Day, it is that no one language should dominate another. So whilst it may be the case that, the British Bangladeshi community in the UK are primarily of Sylheti background, it's probably more incumbent on us to make sure we support and we give platform to those that are probably minoritized within minority groups as well. So I think it's important for us to take that responsibility, just as everyone else, in terms of supporting those that speak Bangla who may not be the dominant group within our community. I think that's really important, because I think that's the overall message here, that no group, no ethnic group, no language should dominate another language. But I think in terms of, very quickly, I'm going to say just perhaps a few key points. You spoke about diminishing languages or the fact that dialects in particular is important to preserve as well, and to be able to distinguish the differences is really important, to recognize the uniqueness of each different dialect, each different language. I think that's really important because we are in also the UN Decade of Indigenous Languages as well. It runs until 2032, and that's also sort of looking at the fact that there is a risk that certain languages will get extinguished. So I think it's important to look at that in terms of the global context as well. But I think there are certain things that should also happen at a national level as well. Look, I think it's really important that we fight back, for example, in terms of the narrowing of the curriculum in the UK. We are looking at the fact that GCSE and A-level options are narrowing. We are seeing more of a focus on European languages, or whilst I think that's it's really good to have those options, but I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are many languages outside of Europe that should be available for young people to engage with at a much earlier stage in their life. So I could go on, but I'm just going to throw that one out there because I'm incredibly passionate about that. There has been some debate and some conversation in Parliament about that, and as a member of the Education Committee, it's something that I've spoken about quite a lot, and something that hopefully we're able to do an inquiry or something like that into at some point in the future, because I think that's where some of the crux of the problem is at the moment nationally.
Okay, Apsana, thank you. And thank you for shining a light on language diversity and acceptance and acknowledgement of all languages, and for the work that you're doing as well.